أعزائي المشاهدين، نتابع هذا اللقاء الخاص مع سعادة السفير بول بريمر. سعادة السفير، يغيب الرئيس العراقي جلال الطالباني نحو 10 أشهر دون انقطاع عن المشهد السياسي لظروف صحية، ولا يلوح في الأفق أي فرصة لعودته واستئناف مهامه الرئاسية. هل تعتقد أن تقسيم المناصب الحكومية وفق أسس طائفية بين الشيعة والسنة وأساس عرقي بالنسبة للأكراد يسهم عمليا في زعزعة استقرار العراق؟ وما هي ملامح رؤيتك شخصيا بعد هذه الخبرة وبعد هذا الوقت لمستقبل المنطقة الكردية في العراق؟
Well, let me first say that I have great respect for President Talabani, and I wish him and his family well. I hope he recovers from his illness. No, I don't think it's a very good way to organize things. I said earlier in the show that I don't think organizing Iraq or the United States or France on the basis of ethnic or sectarian grounds is a very productive way to organize things. The problem we had in writing the Constitution, or helping the Iraqis write the Constitution, was the Iraqis themselves basically saw matters in those terms. And they wound up with a situation where they have at the present time anyway, a Kurdish president. On the Kurdish region, I haven't been there, but my understanding from friends who've been there, Iraqis and others, is that they have a very successful economy going now. Lots of money going in there, a lot of buildings going up, universities, businesses, not just from Turkey, but from other parts of the world, activities in the oil and energy section, where obviously they still have differences with the government in Baghdad. But I think the Kurds, because they effectively got out from under the thumb of Saddam Hussein 12 years before the liberation in 2003, they are further along in both the political and economic development than the rest of Iraq. That seems to be the case.
هل تعتقد أنه المنطقة الكردية تستطيع أن تعيش بشكل مستقل كليا عن العراق وتشكل دولة مستقلة ويكون لديها القدرة على الحياة؟
I think that the concerns that I mentioned earlier about the impact of an independent Kurdistan in Iraq are still there, and maybe in some ways even greater because of the civil war in Syria. Because you now have got an entire section in northeast Syria where the Kurds are prominent, who would be very much attracted to the idea of an independent Kurdistan. That in turn would draw in Kurds from Turkey and most significantly potentially from the Kurdish region of Iran. I don't think the Iranian government would tolerate the secession, the departure of the Kurds. They are the second largest minority group in Iran. People forget that the Persians are barely a majority in Iran. It's basically a Persian-run, multi-ethnic country, with Azeris being the largest and the Kurds the next. So I think, and I have said that over the years to my Kurdish friends in Iraq, there is a real danger, a regional danger of Iraqi Kurdistan declaring formal independence from Baghdad. The situation obviously is now much more complicated and difficult than it was when I was there because of the threatened disintegration of the Syrian state with the impact on the Syrian Kurds and then that impact on the Turkish Kurds. So I think it's a very dangerous situation.
لا تعتقد أن بالإمكان للأكراد أن يشكلوا دولة مستقلة وتستطيع الحياة؟ لأنه كما ذكرت إيران لا ترغب في ذلك، تركيا لا ترغب في ذلك، وأيضا سوريا لا ترغب في ذلك، ترغب في أن يكون بلد موحد، وبالتالي الخيار الكردي هو أن يكون في عراق موحد كمواطن عراقي، أليس كذلك؟
There are both economic and political and strategic concerns about an independent Kurdistan, starting in Iraq. Particularly its impact in the immediate future on the Syrian and Kurdish Syrian and Turkish Kurds, and in geopolitical terms, its impact on Iran. I really do not think the government of Iran is prepared to see the disintegration of Iran, because for the first time in its history, the Azeri population in Iran actually has an alternative. It's called Azerbaijan. There actually is a country now where Azeris are in the majority. So the Iranians face, in some ways, the same kind of problem that the Soviet Union faced when the Soviet Union came apart. What happens when all of these people begin to assert their independence? So there is, I think, a real political danger, or geopolitical danger, of proceeding. You can write on paper how nice it would be if there were an independent Kurdistan. There's also a question about its economic viability, because the Kurds in Iraq would have to assert full ownership of the oil resources in the north, and I don't think a government in Baghdad, this one or a likely successor, is going to go along with that. So there are some real problems.
هذا يقودنا إلى زيارة رئيس الوزراء المالكي مؤخرا إلى واشنطن، والتقى بالرئيس أوباما وبنائب الرئيس بايدن وبأعضاء الكونغرس. طبعا قيل أن المهمة الرئيسية كانت لتفعيل اتفاقية الإطار الاستراتيجي ولكيفية مواجهة عودة الإرهاب إلى العراق بزخم كبير، يتحول العراق إلى حقل للموت عمليا بسبب التفجيرات التي تحدث يوميا، ولا يتم التركيز الإعلامي الكافي عليها، على هذه المأساة الكبيرة. ما هو رأيك وتقييمك لمستوى العلاقات السياسية والعلاقات عموما القائمة بين الحكومتين العراقية لنور المالكي ولأوباما؟ وفي نفس الوقت كان ملفت أنه التقى ببايدن لفترة مطولة، ونائب الرئيس هو الذي يتصل عادة بالزعماء العراقيين وكأنه يتابع الملف العراقي، ولكن سبق له أن تحدث عن التقسيم الناعم للعراق. ما هي نصائحك، إذا كان لديك نصائح للإدارة الأمريكية ولإدارة رئيس الوزراء المالكي حول كيفية مواجهة الوضع الراهن؟
Well, let me say first of all that I said at the time when Vice President Biden, among others, suggested the partition of Iraq, that it was a stupid idea, and I still say it's a stupid idea for all the reasons we've talked about. And I don't think the Vice President is saying that anymore anyway. The relations between the United States and Iraq are not as good as they should be. And there's blame on both sides. I think President Obama made a very serious mistake in pulling the American troops out 2 years ago. There was a deal to be made, keeping them there. The president apparently didn't think it was worth pushing, and we left. And that had the consequences in Iraq. One of them is that, as al-Maliki said in his visit, Iraq faces an increasing challenge of dealing with a revived al-Qaeda, particularly in the western regions, but also now in the main cities. There was a bombing yesterday in Bakuba, in Baghdad, and so forth. And dealing with the overflow of the Jusra al-Nasra and other al-Qaeda type groups from Syria into the western Anbar province. So al-Maliki has a point that he needs some help militarily. Both of them should regret the fact that they didn't keep American troops there to help with counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, and most of all, they have lost a lot of the American intelligence capabilities by having our troops pulled out. Now, al-Maliki was asking, as I understand it, for substantial military assistance, helicopters, Apache helicopters, and ground forces. As I understand it, the American government position was, look, we're prepared to consider and carry out, after all, they have an agreement to supply F-16 aircraft. But you, Prime Minister, have got to find a way to open the political dialogue more, because I'm speaking for myself, not the government. My view is that al-Maliki has narrowed the political scope for action there by taking steps that are unnecessary against the Sunnis and by not finding an agreement with the Kurds. Now, Kurds are hard to deal with. I dealt with them. But there should be a deal that could be done with the Kurds. It's in everybody's interest. And I think the Prime Minister probably didn't like hearing that message, but I think that's the right message. And the right message is that the American government and the American people who have sacrificed a lot to bring democracy to Iraq look forward to a free and open election on schedule next spring. And we don't have a candidate for who's going to be the new leader. That's a question for the Iraqi people to decide. So that, I think, is the message that needed to be delivered. I wasn't in the meeting, so I don't know exactly what happened. But both sides are, I think, paying a price for not having American troops on the ground, which meant, as a political matter, that we lost our influence and leverage in Iraq, which left the door open for the Iranians to move in. It was a vacuum that somebody was going to fill.
سأسألك عن الدول الجوار، ولكن لنتابع هذه النقطة. هل لا تزال على اتصال ببعض الزعماء العراقيين؟ وهل أنت برأيك يجب توفير المعدات العسكرية العاجلة التي طلبها المالك لمواجهة عودة تنظيم داعش الدولة الإسلامية في العراق والشام التي تعود وجبهة النصرة للعمل في العراق؟
It is in our interest, in Iraq's interest, that Al-Qaeda be defeated again. We did defeat them once already in 2008 and 2009.
ولكن يتم دعمها بطريقة غير مباشرة في سوريا. الموقف الأمريكي الرسمي أو السياسة الرسمية.
Yeah, no, I understand the problem, but I'm saying that, of course, it's in our interest that they should be defeated in Iraq. It is in our interest that Iraq have a stable environment. A lot of Americans died giving Iraq the chance to build its own country. We spent a lot of money there. Iraqis died. They've spent a lot of money. So we have a mutual interest in that. I'm not enough involved in the details to know what kind of military assistance would make the biggest difference. My instinct tells me that it's in the area of counterinsurgency and counterinsurgency intelligence. Those are the areas where it doesn't require American boots on the ground. We're not talking about a new status of forces agreement. We're not talking about putting hundreds of American troops there. We understand the political problems for al-Maliki for that. But on his side, one hopes that al-Maliki also understands that if he's going to continue to get the support of the American people and the American government, he has to show that there's a real democracy, that he is open to involvement by all streams of Iraqi society in the governance of the country, and that he's prepared to see that free, fair, and open elections take place next spring.
قبل أن أسألك عن الجانب الإقليمي، دول الجوار، تركيا، السعودية، الوضع في سوريا، هناك سؤال لم يتم الإجابة عليه ويتعلق حتى في كتابك لم تشر إليه. أنت أشرت فقط إلى أنه تم إلقاء القبض على الرئيس العراقي صدام حسين. لم تقل لنا، ونأمل الآن أن تكشف، هل لديك معلومات كيف تم الكشف؟ من كشف القوات الأمريكية عن مكان اختباء الرئيس صدام حسين، وكذلك عن منزل اختباء نجليه قصي وعدي، ومن فاز بالمكافأة المالية في الحالتين؟
The sons were identified by an Iraqi who pointed out to our military where they were stationed in a building in Mosul. They were invited to surrender, and instead they fired back, wounded some American soldiers, and our military returned fire, and they were both killed, and a reward was paid to that Iraqi.
هل تذكر اسمه؟
No, I never knew his name. I never knew his name. For security reasons, I didn't know his name. I didn't want to know his name.
كان قريبا من نجلي الرئيس العراقي راحل صدام حسين؟ بس هل عرفت علاقته بهم؟
You know, people's lives are involved in the answer to that question, so I'm not going to answer it.
ماذا عن موضوع الرئيس إذن؟
The president. you know, we spent 6 months looking for him, and they were looking in all the palaces and stuff. And eventually our military came up with the idea that it was more likely that he would be identified by a chauffeur or a gardener. Somebody would know, somebody who was a worker, not a high-level person, Izzy Al-Duri or one of these guys. It would be somebody who had been driving him in his taxi or whatever. And that's what happened. I won't go into the details again because people's lives are involved. But our special forces found him, as is well known now, on a farm south of Tikrit. Not really by accident. They went there for a reason, although there was nobody there apparently until they found this. There was a rope in the sand that they looked, and they pulled the rope, and then this cover came off of his spider hole, and there he was.
المكافأة دفعت لهذا الشخص أيضا, right?
I'm not going to get into rewards, but there were rewards paid in many cases.
السؤال الأخير، طبعا نحن نستطيع أن نتحدث حتى في الأمور التي ناقشناها أكثر، ولكن يتعلق بصورة أساسية بالوضع في سوريا. وأنت أشرت إلى أنه يجب أن يتم هزيمة القاعدة وداعش الآن في العراق، ولكن نحن نجد أن الأزمة في سوريا التي استمرت لحوالي 3 أعوام تقريبا، سنصل إليها بعد شهور، هي تؤثر الآن على الوضع في العراق، وبالتالي هناك ضرورة لاعتماد سياسة مختلفة في كيفية التعاطي مع الوضع السوري. كيف ترى الأزمة السورية، وكيف ترى كيفية التعامل مع هذا الوضع، وما يفترض أن يكون به الموقف الأمريكي تجاه ما يجري في سوريا؟
My view for the last 2 years has been that we should have immediately provided armed assistance to the more moderate elements, mostly defectors from the Syrian army. By postponing that decision, and in fact we've never carried it out, all of the bad things that the American government said would happen have happened. The extremists have been strengthened, the more moderate elements have faded away. The violence has continued. We estimate now that something like 120,000 Syrians have been killed in the last 2.5 years. The administration's policy has been very confusing, in my view. They have said, and they continue to say, that the objective that they seek is that Assad must go. That really was the president's first red line that he gave 2 years ago. The effect of the agreement that the Russians and we made on the chemical weapons is to ensure that Assad stays. So there's an inherent contradiction, because there's no way the inspectors can carry out their job without cooperating with Saddam. I think the situation has gotten very serious. I don't know at this point what more can be done. And it is, but yes, I meant Bashar Assad. It is a situation where it is not impossible that Syria simply comes apart, and you wind up with a part that is probably mostly in the west and in the north, that is run by an Alawite rump state, maybe with Assad still there, I don't know. And then a very messy operation where Al-Qaeda, Jamaat al-Nusra is very strong, which is certainly not in America's interest, and I don't think in Syria's interest. At this point, it's very hard to see how that trend can be stopped, frankly, because I think America and its allies made a mistake in not going in early, and now I don't know what to do, frankly. It is a very difficult problem.
هناك اتهامات للسعودية من قبل المسؤولين العراقيين بأنهم يلعبوا دور سلبي في تأجيج العنف ودعم بعض الجماعات في العراق. برأيك على السعودية أن تعدل في سياستها فيما يتعلق في هذا الأمر وأن تكف عن هذه الأعمال؟
If the Saudi government is involved, I would think they should stop. Now, it is the case when I was there and the insurgency was just starting, and particularly in 2006 and 2007 when the insurgency really got going, most of the Al-Qaeda car bombers and operatives were not from Iraq. They were from places like Saudi Arabia, Algeria, Libya, Egypt. They were from other countries. So I don't know today what the context, I don't know who's conducting these bombings now for Al-Qaeda in Iraq, whether they're Saudis or not. If they're being supported by the Saudi government, I think that's not a friendly thing to do either to Iraq or to the United States. But I have to say, it's quite clear from Saudi actions in the last 2 weeks that they're pretty fed up with the American government at the moment themselves. They're turning down the Security Council seat and then making public their reasons for doing that are a clear indication the Saudis are worried that the Iranian influence in places like Iraq is becoming very strong. So they have a concern, as I do, about the fact that America's withdrawal really from Iraq, eventually from Afghanistan, will have the impact of strengthening the Iranians in the region. And that is a geopolitical concern I think that Americans should also share.
للأسف لم يبقى لدينا وقت، ربما تجاوزنا الوقت، ولكن لدي فقط سؤال سريع وبإجابة سريعة. ما هو شعورك الآن بعد 10 سنوات على ما جرى في العراق وتجد أن الأزمة مستمرة والشعب العراقي يعاني؟ ماذا يخطر في ذهنك الآن وما هي مشاعرك نحو الشعب العراقي؟
You know, I developed great affection for the Iraqi people. It surprised many Iraqis to know that because they don't consider themselves very affectionate. But they are. I developed great affection for the Iraqi people and enormous respect for Iraq and for its history, going back now 5,000 years to Hammurabi. I think in retrospect, looking back, I was talking to a friend who was there with me in Iraq 10 years ago. I think we can say we did the best we could with the situation we were given and the fact that we never had enough troops. In the areas that the CPA, that I was responsible for, which was political reconstruction and economic reconstruction, Iraq has been a success. There have been certainly setbacks in both areas, particularly in the area of corruption. But it is a functioning democracy. A per capita income today in Iraq is 6 times what it was before liberation. Millions and millions of Iraqis have access to potable water. Only 3% had access before Saddam's overthrow. Foreign direct investment is booming. Oil production is booming. So on the political and economic side, while there certainly were mistakes and there have been setbacks, I think we had a respectable record. The real problem was security, and it still is security. And that has to be solved now by the Iraqis. They're going to have to figure out how to put down the problem that is growing, particularly in the West. And I think to the degree America can help, particularly through intelligence and counterinsurgency assistance, we should do it. But only on the condition that al-Maliki opens the political field.
شكرا سعادة السفير على هذا اللقاء. أعزائي المشاهدين، نشكركم على حسن الاستماع وإلى اللقاء في مقابلات أخرى.